So there I was, standing in my parents' kitchen at 2 a.m., holding a will that basically said, "Thanks for sacrificing your entire life for us, but we're giving everything to your brother who couldn't even be bothered to visit." Yeah, that happened to me. And if you think you know how this story ends, trust me, you don't. Let me back up a bit. 3 years ago, I was a junior at State University studying engineering, had a solid GPA, decent social life, and honestly, I was pretty proud of where I was heading. Then Mom called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was cramming for my thermodynamics exam. "Honey, your father fell again." Now, Dad had been having these episodes for a while. We all knew something was off, but he was stubborn as hell about seeing doctors. Mom had been covering for him, making excuses, but that phone call, I could hear the fear in her voice that she'd been hiding for months. "How bad?" I asked, already knowing I wasn't going to like the answer. "He doesn't remember how he got to the kitchen. He was making coffee and just forgot what he was doing. The stove was on, the kettle was empty, and he was just standing there staring at it." That's when I knew. We all knew, really, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Dad was developing dementia, and Mom was drowning trying to handle it alone. My brother Jake, he was off in California, working some tech job that apparently paid well enough for him to send a card on birthdays and call on Christmas. "Sorry I can't visit more," he'd always say. "Work's just crazy right now." Always work. Always an excuse. So guess who dropped everything and drove the 4 hours home that weekend? Not Jake, me. And when I saw Dad trying to put his shoes on his hands and Mom crying in the bathroom thinking nobody could hear her, I made a decision that would change everything. I withdrew from college. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. That's noble, but couldn't you have found another way? Maybe. But when you're watching your parents, the people who sacrificed everything for you, falling apart, noble isn't even part of the equation. It's just what you do. The plan was simple, or so I thought. I'd take a gap year, get Dad the help he needed, make sure Mom wasn't carrying this burden alone, and then figure out how to get back to school. Financial aid, student loans, whatever it took. That gap year turned into 3 years. 3 years of doctor appointments, insurance battles, medication schedules, and watching my father slowly disappear, while my mother aged a decade in what felt like months. Jake would call every few weeks. "How's Dad doing?" he'd ask, and I'd give him the update. "Man, that's rough. I wish I could help more, but this project at work." Always a project. Always something more important than being here. The thing is, I didn't resent it at first. I figured Jake was just different, you know? Some people handle family crises by staying busy, keeping their distance. I handle it by diving in head first, even if it means my own life goes on pause. But 3 years of being the only one there, 3 years of watching my engineering degree collect dust while my friends graduated and moved on with their lives, that starts to wear on you. Especially when your brother's Instagram is full of hiking trips and fancy dinners while you're Googling how to get someone with dementia to take their pills. Still, I kept telling myself it was temporary, that eventually things would stabilize and I'd figure out how to rebuild my life. Dad would get the care he needed, Mom would find her footing again, and somehow I'd find my way back to the person I used to be. I had no idea that in just a few months, I'd be standing in that kitchen, holding a piece of paper that would make me question everything I thought I knew about family, sacrifice, and what it really means to be there for someone. The official diagnosis came 6 months after I'd moved back home. Alzheimer's disease, early to moderate stage. The doctor was kind but blunt. Dad had maybe 5 good years left, and good was a relative term. I'll never forget sitting in that sterile office, watching Mom grip Dad's hand while he smiled and nodded like we were discussing the weather. He didn't really understand what was happening to him, which was probably a mercy. The rest of us understood perfectly, and it was devastating. "We'll need to start planning for progressive care," the doctor said, sliding a pamphlet across the desk. "Eventually, he'll need full-time supervision. There are some excellent facilities in the area." "No." Mom's voice was sharp, final. "He's staying home. We'll figure it out." And by we, she meant me. because Jake was still in California, still too busy with his project to even take the call about Dad's diagnosis. I left 3 voicemails before he finally called back. Alzheimer's. Damn, that's really rough, he said. I could hear traffic in the background, like he was walking somewhere more important than this conversation. So what's the plan? The plan is I'm staying here and helping Mom take care of him. Wow, that's really good of you, man. I wish I could help more, but work's just insane right now. We're launching this new product and… Jake, I cut him off. Dad has Alzheimer's. He's going to forget who we are. This isn't about your product launch. Silence. Then, I know that. God, you don't have to be so dramatic about it. I'm just saying the timing is really bad. Maybe in a few months I can take some time off and visit. A few months. Dad might not remember his own name in a few months, but sure, Jake would visit when his schedule cleared up. That conversation set the tone for the next 2.5 years. I became Dad's primary caregiver, and honestly, it was harder than any engineering course I'd ever taken. You can't solve dementia with formulas or logic. You can't debug a brain that's slowly losing its programming. Some days were okay. Dad would have these moments of clarity where he'd remember something from when Jake and I were kids, or he'd help Mom with simple tasks around the house. Those were the days that kept me going. But other days he'd wake up convinced I was a stranger who'd broken into his house. Or he'd get violent when I tried to help him shower. Or he'd wander off in the middle of the night, and I'd find him 3 blocks away in his pajamas, asking neighbors if they'd seen his parents. My parents. Not his kids, not his wife. His parents, who'd been dead for 20 years. The worst part wasn't Dad's confusion, though. It was watching Mom slowly break down under the weight of watching her husband disappear. She'd try to hide it, but I'd catch her crying over old photo albums, or standing in the doorway of their bedroom just watching him sleep, like she was memorizing him. I don't know how to do this, she whispered to me one night after a particularly bad episode. 43 years of marriage, and I don't know how to talk to him anymore. I didn't know how to talk to him either, but I was learning. You learn to live in their reality instead of forcing them into yours. You learn that arguing with dementia is like arguing with the weather. Pointless and exhausting. You learn to find joy in tiny moments, like when he'd remember my name or smile at a joke he'd told 100 times. Meanwhile, Jake sent flowers on Dad's birthday. Flowers, like Dad was going to remember them, or like flowers were somehow equivalent to being there when Dad threw his dinner plate across the room because he couldn't remember how to use a fork. But I kept telling myself that Jake was dealing with this in his own way, that maybe seeing Dad like this would be too hard for him, and staying away was his coping mechanism. I gave him every benefit of the doubt, even when he'd call and spend most of the conversation talking about his job, his girlfriend, his new apartment. Even when he'd end those calls with, "Give my love to Mom and Dad," like he was passing along regards to distant relatives instead of our parents. I was so focused on taking care of everyone else that I never stopped to think about what I was giving up. My friends had graduated, my engineering contacts had moved on, my whole life was on hold, and I told myself it was temporary. Temporary. That's the word that kept me going through the hardest days. This is temporary, I'd tell myself while cleaning up Dad's accidents or explaining to him for the 5th time why he couldn't drive anymore. This is temporary, I'd think while watching my former classmates post about their new jobs and new apartments. But temporary started to feel permanent when Dad stopped recognizing Mom. When he started asking me who that strange woman was who kept trying to get in bed with him. When Mom started sleeping in the guest room because her own husband was afraid of her. That's when I realized that maybe I'd been wrong about what temporary meant. Maybe the old Dad was gone for good. Maybe this was our new normal, and I'd just have to build a life around it. I just never imagined that while I was building my life around taking care of my parents, they were building their final plans around Jake. By the 2nd year, Dad barely spoke anymore. He'd sit in his favorite chair, the brown leather recliner he'd had since I was 12, and just stare out the window. Sometimes he'd hum old songs, fragments of melodies from his youth, but mostly he was quiet. The silence was almost worse than the confusion had been. Mom and I developed this weird routine. I'd handle the morning shift, getting Dad washed, dressed, and fed, while she took the afternoons. Evenings, we'd trade off, depending on how he was doing. Some nights, he'd be agitated, pacing the house and calling for people who weren't there. Other nights, he'd be completely docile, like a ghost of himself. The isolation was killing me, though. I'd lost touch with most of my college friends. Hard to maintain friendships when you can't go out, can't make plans, can't even have a phone conversation without being interrupted by a crisis. People tried to understand at first, but after a while, the invitations stopped coming. "You should get out more," Mom would say, but how could I? Dad couldn't be left alone for more than an hour, and Mom was exhausted. She'd aged so much in those 2 years that strangers would assume she was my grandmother, not my mother. Jake finally visited during Dad's third Christmas with the diagnosis. He stayed for 4 days, and I watched him struggle to hide his shock at how bad things had gotten. Dad didn't recognize him at all, kept calling him Tommy, some kid Jake had been friends with in elementary school. "Jesus," Jake whispered to me on his second day there. "I didn't realize he was this bad." "I've been telling you," I said, probably sharper than I should have been. "In every phone call, every update, this is what Alzheimer's looks like." I know. It's just seeing it in person is different. He looked genuinely shaken. "How do you guys do this every day?" "We don't have a choice." That visit was the closest Jake and I had been in years, literally and figuratively. He helped with Dad's care, took some of the burden off Mom and me, and for a few days, I remembered what it felt like to have a brother. But then he left, and things went back to normal. Except now, the phone calls were even more awkward. He'd ask about Dad, and I'd tell him the truth, that Dad was getting worse, that he'd started having trouble swallowing, that he was sleeping most of the day. Jake would make sympathetic noises and promise to visit again soon. Soon never came. The thing about being a caregiver is that it becomes your entire identity. I wasn't a former engineering student anymore, or a young adult with dreams and ambitions. I was the daughter who takes care of her parents. That's how neighbors introduced me, how doctors' offices identified me, how I identified myself. My days were structured around medication schedules, doctor appointments, and preventing Dad from hurting himself. I became an expert in Medicare regulations, disability benefits, and how to convince someone with dementia to eat when they'd forgotten how to chew. I also became an expert in resentment, though I tried to hide it. Resentment toward Jake for his freedom. Resentment toward my friends for their normal lives. Resentment toward Dad for getting sick, which made me feel guilty, which made me more resentful. The worst part was watching Mom sacrifice herself on the altar of caregiving. She'd given up her book club, her weekly coffee dates, her whole social life to care for a man who no longer knew who she was. She'd developed this nervous habit of touching her wedding ring whenever Dad looked at her with confusion, like she was reminding herself that he'd loved her once. "Mom, you need to take care of yourself too," I'd tell her. "I'm fine," she'd always say. But she wasn't fine. She was disappearing just as surely as Dad was, just in a different way. I started researching care facilities again, not because I wanted to put Dad in one, but because I was scared we were all going to break. The good places had waiting lists. The affordable places looked like warehouses for dying people. The places that were both good and affordable didn't exist. "We can't afford the nice places," I told Mom during one of our late-night conversations, "and I can't put him in one of those other places, but I don't know how much longer we can do this." "We'll figure it out," she said, the same thing she'd been saying for 3 years. "We always do." But I was starting to wonder if we would. I was 25 years old, and I felt like I was 50. I had no career, no relationship, no life outside of this house and these routines. I'd put my entire future on hold, and for what? Dad was never going to get better. Mom was never going to get her husband back. I was never going to get those years back. And Jake? Jake was getting promoted, buying a house, living the life I'd given up. That's when I started having those dark thoughts. Not about hurting anyone, just about what would happen if I left. If I just got in my car one day and drove back to the life I'd abandoned, would Mom be able to handle it alone? Would Jake finally step up if I forced his hand? I never acted on those thoughts, but having them scared me. I'd become someone I didn't recognize, bitter, exhausted, trapped. I loved my parents, but I was starting to hate my life, and I didn't know how to separate the two. I thought things couldn't get worse. I thought I'd hit rock bottom and was just waiting for something to change, some sign that the sacrifice would be worth it. I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. Dad stopped eating in March. Not all at once. It was gradual, like everything else with this disease. First, he'd push food around his plate, forget what the fork was for. Then he'd only eat if Mom or I fed him, small bites, like feeding a baby. Finally, even that became impossible. "We need to talk about options," Dr. Martinez said during what would be our last appointment at his office. "There are feeding tubes, IV nutrition, but at this stage..." She didn't need to finish. I knew what she meant. We were talking about prolonging dying, not sustaining living. Mom held Dad's hand in the car afterward, and he actually squeezed back. One of those little moments of connection that were getting rarer and rarer. "What do you want to do?" I asked her. "I want to take him home," she said. "No hospitals, no procedures, just home." So we did. We converted the living room into a makeshift hospital room, brought in a hospital bed, oxygen equipment, all the things you never think you'll need until you do. Hospice came by twice a week, and I learned a whole new vocabulary. Morphine drips, bed sores, death rattles. The weird thing about watching someone die slowly is how normal it becomes. You adapt to everything. The smell of sickness, the sound of labored breathing, the weight of knowing that each day might be the last. You find routines even in dying. I called Jake to tell him it was time. If he wanted to say goodbye, he needed to come now. "How long does he have?" Jake asked. "Days, maybe weeks. The hospice nurse said it's hard to predict. I can't just drop everything and fly out there. I have this presentation next week and..." "Jake," I cut him off. "Dad is dying. Not might die, not someday. Now, this week." Silence. Then, I know, okay? It's just, what if I come out there and he lasts another month? I can't stay indefinitely." "So you're not coming?" "I didn't say that. I just need to figure out the timing." The timing. Our father was dying, and my brother was worried about timing. Dad lasted 11 days. 11 days of Mom and me taking turns sitting beside his bed, holding his hand, talking to him, even though he couldn't respond. I read him articles from his favorite sports magazine. Mom played his favorite songs on the little CD player we'd set up beside his bed. Jake called every day during those 11 days, asking for updates. "How's he doing? Any changes?" Like he was checking on the weather instead of his father's final moments. On day 9, Dad opened his eyes and looked right at me. Really looked, with recognition. "Katie?" he said. My name. He said my name. "I'm here, Dad. I'm right here." "Good girl," he whispered. "Good girl." Those were the last words he ever said to me. 2 days later, he was gone. I called Jake at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. He answered on the 4th ring, voice groggy with sleep. "Dad died," I said. "What? When?" "About an hour ago, peacefully. Mom and I were with him." There was a long pause. "I should have been there." "Yes," I said, "you should have. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll catch the first flight out." "The funeral's Saturday. Mom wants to keep it simple." "I'll be there. I'll take care of the arrangements, the expenses, whatever you need." It was the first time in 3 years that Jake had offered to take care of anything, and it was too late. Way too late. He did come for the funeral, though. Flew in Friday night, stayed until Sunday morning. He gave a beautiful eulogy about Dad's love for his family, his work ethic, his devotion to Mom. It was a good speech, and it was mostly true. But it felt like he was talking about someone he'd known once, a long time ago. After the service, people kept coming up to me. "You're such a good daughter," they'd say. "Your parents were so lucky to have you." And I'd smile and thank them. But inside, I was screaming. I didn't feel lucky. I felt cheated. The house was unbearably quiet after everyone left. Mom and I moved around each other like ghosts, not sure what to do with ourselves now that our lives weren't structured around Dad's care. We should go through his things, Mom said a few days later. Start organizing. But she couldn't bring herself to touch anything. His clothes still hung in the closet. His coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. His pills were still lined up in the weekly organizer I'd filled every Sunday for 3 years. I started the process alone. It felt wrong going through his personal things, but somebody had to do it. I found old photos, letters from when he and Mom were dating, a journal he'd kept during his first year of Alzheimer's, before he couldn't write anymore. The entries were heartbreaking. I forgot Katie's birthday today. How do you forget your own daughter's birthday? I tried to make coffee this morning and couldn't remember how. Anne had to help me. I felt so stupid. The last entry was from 2 years ago. I'm losing myself. I can feel it happening and I can't stop it. I'm scared. I want to tell the girls I love them while I still remember how. I sat on his bedroom floor, holding that journal, and cried harder than I had since the day he died. He'd known. He'd known what was happening to him, and he'd been scared. And I'd been so focused on the practical stuff that I'd never really asked him how he felt about it. That's when I found the manila envelope, tucked away in his desk drawer. My name was written on it in his shaky handwriting, and inside was a letter dated just 6 months after his diagnosis. Katie, it began. If you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm not myself anymore. I want you to know that I see what you're doing for me and your mother. I see the sacrifice you're making, and I'm so proud of you. But I'm also worried about you. Don't let taking care of me become your whole life. You have dreams, and I want you to chase them. I want you to be happy. I want you to live. The letter was 3 pages long, full of memories from my childhood, advice for my future, and gratitude for everything I'd done. At the end, he'd written, I've taken care of some things financially. You and your mother won't have to worry about money. You gave me the gift of dying at home with dignity. I hope I can give you the gift of living your life without regret. I read that letter 5 times before I could process what it meant. Dad had taken care of some things financially. He'd made sure Mom and I would be okay. For the first time in 3 years, I felt hopeful about the future. Maybe I could go back to school. Maybe I could start over, build the life I'd put on hold. Maybe the sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. I had no idea that hope was about to be crushed in the most devastating way possible. The appointment with Dad's lawyer was set for the following Thursday. Mom had been putting it off, said she wasn't ready to deal with all that legal stuff, but Mr. Patterson, Dad's attorney for the past 15 years, said it was important we meet sooner rather than later. Jake flew back out for the meeting. He'd been more attentive since the funeral, calling every few days, actually asking how Mom and I were doing, instead of just checking in out of obligation. I thought maybe Dad's death had shaken him into remembering he had a family. We met at Miss Patterson's office downtown, the same place where Dad had updated his will 3 years earlier. I remembered going with him to that appointment, right after his diagnosis. He'd been very secretive about it, said it was just routine updates and that I shouldn't worry about it. Thank you all for coming, Mr. Patterson said, settling behind his desk with a thick folder. I know this is difficult timing, but Robert was very specific about wanting this handled promptly. Mom sat between Jake and me, still wearing her black dress from the funeral. She looked smaller somehow, like she was shrinking into herself. Before we begin with the formal reading, I want to express my condolences. Robert was a good man, and he spoke about you all frequently. Mr. Patterson opened the folder. Now, the will is straightforward, but there are some specific provisions I need to explain. I felt that flutter of hope again, thinking about Dad's letter. He'd taken care of us. Everything was going to be okay. The primary beneficiary of Robert's estate is his son, Jacob Mitchell. Mr. Patterson's voice was calm, professional. This includes the house, all financial assets, the life insurance policy, and Robert's pension benefits. Wait, what? I felt the blood drain from my face. Beside me, Mom went completely still. I'm sorry, I said. Sure, I'd misheard. Could you repeat that? Jacob is the primary beneficiary. However, there are provisions for Catherine and Anne. He flipped through the pages. Catherine, you're to receive Robert's personal effects, his books, tools, photo albums, things of sentimental value. Anne, you're entitled to remain in the house for up to 6 months while you make alternative arrangements. The room started spinning. 6 months? I could stay in my childhood home for 6 months before my brother kicked me out? How much? Jake asked quietly. The estate, I mean. What's the total value? Mr. Patterson consulted his notes. Including the house, life insurance, savings, and pension, approximately $430,000. $430,000 to Jake, who hadn't been here, who hadn't sacrificed anything, who'd spent 3 years making excuses while I put my life on hold. There must be a mistake, I said, my voice sounding strange and far away. My father left me a letter. He said he'd taken care of things financially. He said, Catherine, there's no mistake. Robert updated his will 3 years ago, shortly after his diagnosis. He was very clear about his wishes. 3 years ago, right after I'd moved home, right after I dropped out of college to take care of him. I don't understand, Mom whispered. Why would he do this? Mr. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. Robert's reasoning was that Jacob, as the eldest son, would be better equipped to handle the family's financial affairs. He also mentioned that Jacob's career stability made him the logical choice for inheritance. Career stability. The career Jake had because he'd never had to give up everything to wipe his father's ass and remind him how to use a fork. This is insane, I said, standing up so fast my chair fell over. I gave up college. I gave up my entire life to take care of him. I was here every single day for 3 years, while Jake couldn't even be bothered to visit. Katie, Jake said, reaching for my arm, I'm sure we can work something out. Don't touch me. I jerked away from him. Don't you dare touch me. Perhaps we should take a break, Mr. Patterson suggested. I know this is emotional. Emotional? I laughed, but it came out harsh and broken. My father just told me that 3 years of my life were worth a box of photo albums. Yeah, I'm a little emotional. I walked out of that office and sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Jake came out after me, knocked on my window. Get in, I said. We need to talk. He climbed into the passenger seat, and for a moment, we just sat there in silence. I had no idea, he said finally. I swear to God, Katie, I had no idea he was going to do this. Didn't you? I looked at him. Really? You never wondered why he asked you to be the executor? Why he wanted to meet with you alone during his last visit? Jake's face went pale. He said he wanted to discuss future plans, but I thought he meant for Mom's care, not screwing over the daughter who sacrificed everything for him. I'm not going to keep it, Jake said quickly. The money, the house, we'll split it fairly. This isn't what I wanted. But you'll take it first. You'll inherit everything, and then you'll decide what's fair for me and Mom. I started the car. Get out. Katie, please. Let's go back inside and figure this out. Get out of my car, Jake. He did, and I drove home, leaving him standing in the parking lot of the lawyer's office. I drove home to the house that wasn't mine anymore, to tell my mother that she had 6 months to figure out where she was going to live. I sat in Dad's chair, the brown leather recliner that would soon belong to Jake, and tried to understand how the man who'd written me that beautiful letter about being proud of me had decided I wasn't worth remembering in his will. But I was about to learn that there was so much more to this story than I'd ever imagined. Jake showed up at the house 2 hours later. I heard his rental car in the driveway, heard him talking to Mom on the front porch. She let him in, of course. Mom always let everyone in, even when they didn't deserve it. Katie? His voice carried down the hallway. Can we talk? I was still in Dad's chair, still trying to process everything. The house felt different now, knowing it wasn't ours anymore. Like I was already a guest in my own home. She's in the living room, I heard Mom say. But Jake, she's really upset. Maybe give her some space. I need to fix this, he said. Fix this? Like it was a technical problem he could solve with the right approach. He found me sitting in the dark, hadn't bothered to turn on the lights when evening came. The street light outside cast long shadows across the room. and I could see the outline of Dad's hospital bed, still set up where his favorite couch used to be. "We need to talk about this," Jake said, settling into Mom's chair across from me. "Do we?" I didn't look at him. Seems like Dad already said everything that needed to be said. "I'm going to make this right. I told you that." "How? You going to bring Dad back so I can ask him why he did this? You going to give me back the last 3 years of my life?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "I know you're angry." "Angry?" I finally looked at him. "Angry doesn't cover it, Jake. I'm destroyed. I'm completely fucking destroyed. I get it." "No, you don't get it. You don't get any of it." I stood up, started pacing. "You have no idea what it's been like. You have no idea what I gave up." "Then tell me." "Tell you what? Tell you about the nights I didn't sleep because Dad was wandering around the house? Tell you about dropping out of college while my friends graduated and got jobs? Tell you about watching my mother cry herself to sleep because her husband didn't recognize her anymore? I know it was hard." "Hard?" I laughed bitterly. "It was hard when you forgot to call on Dad's birthday. It was hard when you missed Christmas because of work. This was hell, Jake. This was 3 years of hell. And I chose it because I thought it mattered. I thought it meant something." It did mean something. Not to Dad, apparently. Not enough to leave me more than his old tools and some photo albums. Jake rubbed his face with his hands. "Maybe he thought I'd take care of you guys. Maybe he assumed. He assumed wrong." I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. You know what the worst part is? I found a letter he wrote me right after his diagnosis. 3 pages about how proud he was of me, how he'd taken care of things financially so I wouldn't have to worry about money. He wrote that 6 months before he cut me out of his will. "What changed?" Jake asked quietly. "You tell me. You're the one who talked to him during his last visit. You're the one who had private meetings with him. Those weren't about the will, I swear. He just wanted to make sure I understood Mom's medical history, her medications, stuff like that. And you never once thought to ask why he was telling you all this instead of me, the person who'd been managing his medical care for 3 years?" Jake fell silent. I could see him thinking, trying to piece together conversations he'd had with Dad that maybe hadn't seemed significant at the time. "There was this one thing," he said slowly. "Last Christmas, when I was here, Dad was having a bad day, really confused, and he kept calling me by your name. He thought I was you. So he told me. He told me he was worried about you. Said you were wasting your life taking care of him, that you'd never get married or have kids if you kept it up. He seemed really upset about it." A chill ran down my spine. What exactly did he say? "He said you were too good, that you'd sacrifice everything for family and never think about yourself. He said someone needed to make sure you had a future. By leaving me with nothing? Maybe he thought if you didn't inherit anything, you'd be forced to build your own life. And if I inherited everything, I'd be responsible for taking care of you and Mom." I stared at him. That's the most twisted logic I've ever heard. I'm not saying it makes sense. I'm just trying to understand why he did it. Well, here's what I understand. I stood up again, anger giving me energy. Dad decided that I was too stupid or too weak to handle money. He decided that my 3 years of sacrifice meant less than your engineering degree. He decided that I needed to be managed by my big brother instead of being treated like an adult. That's not... And you know what the really sick part is? He was right about one thing. I did sacrifice everything. I gave up my education, my career, my relationships, my entire future. But I didn't do it because I'm some pathetic martyr. I did it because I loved him, because I thought family meant something. It does mean something. Does it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like family means the person who shows up gets screwed over, and the person who stays away gets rewarded. Jake leaned forward, his voice desperate. "Katie, I'm going to sign everything over to you. The house, the money, all of it. I never wanted this." "You think that fixes it?" I shook my head. "You think you can just write me a check and everything's okay? What else can I do?" "Nothing. You can't do anything. The damage is done." "So what happens now?" I looked around the room, at the place where Dad had spent his last months, where I'd spent 3 years of my life learning how to care for someone who was slowly disappearing. Now, I figure out how to rebuild my life from scratch. At 25, with no degree, no career, and no financial security. You don't have to do it alone. I've been doing everything alone for 3 years, Jake. I think I can handle it. He left that night, flew back to California the next morning, but not before having a long conversation with Mom that I wasn't invited to. I could hear their voices in the kitchen, low and serious, and I knew they were talking about me, planning my future like I was another problem to be solved. The next few days were a blur of phone calls. Jake called every morning, asking how I was doing, what I needed, how he could help. Each conversation felt like salt in an open wound. I didn't want his help. I wanted my father back so I could ask him why he'd done this to me. But I was about to discover that the story I'd been telling myself about my father, about my sacrifice, about everything that had happened in the last 3 years, it was all wrong. I couldn't sleep. 3 days after the will reading, I was still wandering around the house at all hours, trying to make sense of what had happened. That's how I ended up in Dad's study at 2 a.m., going through his desk more thoroughly than I had before. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to understand the man who'd raised me, who'd written me that beautiful letter, and who'd then left me with nothing. His desk was full of the usual stuff: old bills, insurance documents, medical records from his treatments. But then I found the folder marked Catherine, College, tucked away in the back of the bottom drawer. Inside were copies of correspondence I'd never seen before. Letters to the financial aid office at my university, applications for parent loans, payment receipts for tuition, room and board, textbooks, all dated from after I dropped out. My hands were shaking as I read through them. Dad had been paying for my education. For 3 years, while I'd been at home taking care of him, he'd been keeping my spot at the university, paying my tuition, maintaining my enrollment, even though I wasn't attending classes. There was a letter from the dean's office, dated just 6 months ago. Mr. Mitchell, we've received your latest tuition payment for Catherine's continued enrollment. As discussed, we can hold her place in the engineering program for 1 additional semester. But after that, she'll need to either return to classes or formally withdraw. Please let us know Catherine's intentions by the end of the spring semester. Dad had written back, Catherine will return to her studies after I'm gone. Please extend her enrollment through the fall semester. I'll handle any additional costs. After I'm gone. He'd known he was dying, and he'd been planning for my return to school. I found more documents. A savings account I'd never known about, with deposits made every month for the past 3 years. The amounts were small, but they added up to almost $30,000. The account was in my name. There was a letter from a financial advisor discussing investment strategies for Catherine's future. Another letter from the university's career services department, responding to Dad's inquiries about job placement programs for returning students. And then I found the letter that changed everything. It was addressed to Jake, dated 2 months before Dad died. The handwriting was shaky, but it was definitely Dad's. Jake, it began. I need you to understand something about the will. I'm not leaving the house and the bulk of the estate to you because I love you more than Katie, or because I think you deserve it more. I'm doing it because I need you to take care of your mother and sister, and this is the only way I can make sure that happens. My heart was pounding as I read on. Katie has sacrificed everything for me and your mother. She's put her life on hold, given up her education, her career, her future. She's 25 years old, and she's never even had a serious relationship because she's been too busy taking care of us. I'm dying, Jake, and I'm terrified that she's going to spend the rest of her life taking care of your mother the same way she took care of me. The truth is, Katie would never leave your mother alone. Even if I left her money, even if I left her everything, she'd use it to take care of your mother instead of herself. She'd find a way to sacrifice her own future again, because that's who she is. She's too good for her own good. So I'm putting the responsibility on you. I'm making you the executor because I need you to force Katie to live her own life. I need you to make sure she goes back to school, finds a career, gets married, has kids, all the things she'd never do if she felt obligated to stay here. I've been paying for her education for 3 years. I've saved money for her future. I've made sure she'll have everything she needs to start over. But I can't give it to her directly because she won't take it. She'll insist on using it for your mother's care, or she'll refuse it altogether out of guilt. That's where you come in. You inherit everything, but it's not really yours. It's a trust, and you're the trustee. Your job is to make sure Katie gets back to school, make sure your mother is taken care of, and make sure they both have the support they need to build independent lives. I know this seems harsh. I know Katie will hate me for it, at least at first. But I'd rather have her hate me and live her own life than love my memory and waste her future taking care of everyone else. I'm counting on you, Jake. Don't let me down. I read the letter 3 times before it really sank in. Dad hadn't cut me out of his will. He'd been trying to save me from myself. But there was more. At the bottom of the letter, there was a postscript. P.S. I've enclosed a list of all the accounts and investments I've set up for Katie. She'll need to know about them when she's ready to restart her life. I've also included contact information for the financial advisor and the university officials who've been helping me plan for her return to school. Make sure she gets all of this, but only after she's committed to moving forward with her life. I searched through the folder frantically and found a list. 7 different accounts, all in my name, all funded by Dad over the past 3 years. The total was over $100,000. $100,000, plus my maintained enrollment at the university, plus a plan for my future that Dad had been working on for 3 years while I'd been changing his diapers and helping him remember how to eat. I sat in his chair, surrounded by evidence of a love so deep and so thoughtful that it had looked like betrayal. Dad hadn't abandoned me. He'd been orchestrating my escape from a life of perpetual sacrifice. But that meant Jake had known. Jake had known about the accounts, about the plan, about everything, and he'd sat in that lawyer's office and let me believe that Dad had screwed me over. I looked at the clock. 3:30 a.m. in Pennsylvania meant 12:30 a.m. in California. I didn't care. I called Jake. Katie? He answered on the second ring. What's wrong? Is Mom okay? You lying piece of shit, I said. Silence. You knew, I continued. You knew about the accounts, about the plan, about everything, and you let me think Dad had cut me out of his will. Katie, how could you do that to me? How could you let me hate him? I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From knowing that my father loved me enough to plan my entire future? From feeling obligated to stay, Jake said quietly. Dad was right, you know. If I'd told you about the money, about the accounts, you would have refused them. You would have insisted on using everything for Mom's care. That's not your decision to make. It was Dad's decision. I was just following his instructions. His instructions were to tell me after I committed to moving forward with my life, not to let me think he'd betrayed me. I was waiting for the right time. The right time was in that lawyer's office. The right time was when I was falling apart, thinking my father didn't care about me. I'm sorry, Jake said. I'm so sorry. I was trying to do what Dad wanted, but I handled it wrong. You handled it wrong? I laughed bitterly. Jake, I've spent the last 3 days questioning everything I thought I knew about my father. I've been wondering if I wasted 3 years of my life. I've been thinking that maybe I should have just put him in a nursing home and gone on with my life. Dad didn't want you to think that. Then why didn't you tell me the truth? Because you weren't ready to hear it. You were so angry, so hurt. I thought if I just gave you some time to process everything, then I could explain. You thought wrong. I hung up and sat in the dark, trying to process this new information. Dad had loved me. He'd planned for my future. He'd sacrificed his own final wishes to make sure I'd have a life after he was gone. But Jake had nearly ruined it all by trying to manage the situation instead of trusting me with the truth. I was about to learn that the truth was even more complicated than I'd imagined. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Dad's study until sunrise, reading through every document in that folder. There were insurance policies I'd never known about, investment accounts, even a small trust fund that had been set up for my future children's education. But the most shocking discovery was a series of emails between Dad and Jake, dating back 2 years. Dad had been more involved in planning my future than I'd ever imagined. Jake, one email read, "I need you to visit more often. Not for me, but for Katie. She's losing herself in this caregiving role, and I'm worried about her. She needs to see that there's a world outside of this house, that there are people who care about her future." Jake had responded, "I'll try to visit more, but work is really demanding right now. Can't Katie take a break? Maybe hire a home health aide?" Dad's reply was heartbreaking. Katie won't take a break. She's convinced that if she's not here 24/7, something terrible will happen to me. She's afraid to leave me alone for even a few hours. I've created a prison for my own daughter, and I don't know how to free her from it. There were more emails, conversations about my social isolation, my lack of dating life, my refusal to accept help from friends or family members. Dad had been documenting my decline, trying to figure out how to save me from the trap of endless caregiving. In one email, Jake had suggested that maybe I was happy taking care of Dad, that maybe I'd found my calling. Dad's response was swift and angry. "Katie is not happy, she's drowning, and she's too loyal to admit it. She's 24 years old, and she hasn't been on a date in 2 years. She's given up her friends, her education, her dreams, and she's convinced herself that this is noble. It's not noble, Jake. It's tragic." The emails revealed a plan that had been in motion for over a year. Dad had been preparing for his death, but more than that, he'd been preparing for my life after his death. He'd researched re-entry programs for students who'd taken extended breaks. He'd consulted with financial advisors about the best way to fund my return to school. He'd even reached out to a career counselor to help me figure out how to explain the gap in my resume. "Katie is brilliant," he'd written to the career counselor. "She was an excellent student before she put her life on hold to care for me. She's going to need help rebuilding her confidence, and she's going to need someone who understands that her caregiving experience has given her skills that employers will value." But the most devastating email was the last one, sent just a week before Dad died. "Jake, I need you to promise me something. After I'm gone, Katie is going to want to dedicate her life to taking care of your mother. You cannot let that happen. Your mother is only 67 years old. She could live another 20 years. If Katie spends the next 20 years as a caregiver, she'll be 45 before she has a chance to build her own life. She'll never have a career, never get married, never have children. I will not let my illness destroy my daughter's future. The will is designed to force her hand. She'll be angry, she'll feel abandoned, but she'll also be forced to think about her own future for the first time in 3 years. You need to guide her through this, but you can't make it easy for her. She needs to choose her own life, not have it chosen for her. I know this is a lot to ask, but I'm trusting you with the most important thing in my life, Katie's future. Don't let me down." I was crying by the time I finished reading. Dad hadn't just loved me, he'd understood me better than I'd understood myself. He'd seen what I couldn't see, that I was disappearing into the role of caregiver, that I was using his illness as an excuse to avoid the scary work of building my own life. But he'd also seen something else, that I'd never choose myself over family, that I'd sacrifice my own future to take care of Mom, just like I'd sacrificed it to take care of him. The will wasn't punishment, it was intervention. I heard Mom moving around in the kitchen, getting ready for her day. I wiped my eyes and went to find her. "Mom," I said, standing in the doorway, "we need to talk." She looked up from her coffee, and I could see the worry in her eyes. She'd been watching me fall apart for 3 days, and she didn't know how to help. "I found some things in Dad's study," I said. "Things that change everything." I showed her the documents, the emails, the accounts. I watched her face cycle through confusion, surprise, and finally a sad kind of understanding. "He knew," she said quietly. "He knew what this was doing to you." "Did you know about the plan?" She shook her head. "I knew he was worried about you. He'd lie awake at night, talking about how you were wasting your life, but I didn't know about the accounts or the will or any of it. He was trying to save me from myself and from me, Mom said. He was afraid you'd spend the next 20 years taking care of me the same way you took care of him. I sat down across from her. Would you want that? Would you want me to put my life on hold to take care of you? God, no, she said immediately. Katie, I've watched you disappear over the past 3 years. I've watched you turn into someone I don't recognize. You used to be so full of life, so excited about the future. I miss that girl. I miss her too. Your father loved you so much that he was willing to let you hate him if it meant you'd live your own life. That's the most profound act of love I've ever seen. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing what this meant. Dad had orchestrated his own legacy, choosing to be remembered as the father who'd abandoned his daughter rather than the father who'd enabled her self-destruction. So what happens now? Mom asked. Now I call Jake and apologize for calling him a lying piece of shit. Mom laughed despite herself. You called him that? Among other things, I was pretty angry. He was just trying to do what your father asked him to do. I know, but he handled it wrong. He should have trusted me with the truth. Maybe. Or maybe he was right to wait. Maybe you needed to be angry first, to really understand what you were choosing. I thought about that. For 3 days, I'd been forced to confront the possibility that I'd wasted 3 years of my life. I'd been forced to imagine a future where I had to rebuild everything from scratch. And in those 3 days, I'd started to remember who I used to be before I became a caregiver. I'd started to remember that I had dreams. I think I want to go back to school, I said. I think your father would be very happy to hear that. What about you? Are you going to be okay if I leave? I'm going to be fine, she said firmly. I'm 67 years old, not 87. I can take care of myself. And if I need help, I'll ask for it. But I won't let you sacrifice your future for me. Dad really thought of everything, didn't he? He spent 3 years planning your escape. The least we can do is let him succeed. I had one more phone call to make, and this time I was going to tell Jake the truth, that Dad had been right, that I needed to be saved from myself, and that I was finally ready to live my own life. I called Jake at a reasonable hour this time, around 10 a.m. his time. He answered immediately, like he'd been waiting for my call. Katie, I'm so sorry. Stop, I said. I'm the one who needs to apologize. I read everything, Jake. All of it. The emails, the accounts, the real plan. I understand now.
You're not angry?
I'm angry at the situation. I'm angry that Dad felt like he had to die to save me from myself. But I'm not angry at you anymore. You were in an impossible position.
I should have told you the truth from the beginning.
Maybe. Or maybe Dad was right, that I needed to be angry first. Maybe I needed to face the possibility that I'd wasted 3 years of my life so I could decide whether I wanted to waste the rest of it.
And what did you decide?
I decided I want to go back to school. I want to finish my engineering degree. I want to have a career and a life, and maybe someday a family of my own. I could hear the relief in his voice. Dad would be so proud of you. He was proud of me. That's what makes this so hard. He was proud of me for taking care of him, but he was also terrified that I'd never stop taking care of people long enough to take care of myself. So what's the plan? I'm going to call the university today. Dad maintained my enrollment, so I should be able to go back in the fall. I'll need to do some catch-up work, but I can handle it. And Mom's going to be fine. She's stronger than we give her credit for. She took care of Dad for 43 years before he got sick. She can take care of herself. What about the house? That's up to you. Dad left it to you, and I'm not going to fight that. But I'd like Mom to be able to stay there if she wants to. Of course she can stay, as long as she wants. And Katie, the money, the accounts Dad set up for you, that's yours. All of it. I know. I'm going to use it the way Dad intended, for school, for building a life, for the future he wanted me to have. Good. That's really good. We talked for another hour, making plans, figuring out logistics. Jake was going to fly out the following week to help me get everything sorted out. He was going to meet with Mom's financial advisor to make sure she'd be comfortable. He was going to help me figure out how to transfer the accounts Dad had set up for me. But more than that, he was going to be my brother again. For the first time in 3 years, we were going to be a family instead of a collection of people dealing with crisis. After I hung up, I sat in Dad's chair one more time, looking around the room where he'd spent his final months. The hospital bed was gone. We'd had it picked up the day after the funeral. The medical equipment was gone. It was just a living room again, not a sick room. I thought about the letter he'd left me, the one where he'd told me not to let taking care of him become my whole life. He'd known, even then, that I was in danger of losing myself in the role of caregiver, and he'd spent his final years making sure I'd find my way back to myself. I pulled out my phone and called the university. It took 3 different transfers, but eventually I reached someone in the engineering department who remembered my case. "Catherine Mitchell," she said. "Yes, we've been expecting your call. Your father has been in regular contact with us about your return. We have a re-entry program that would be perfect for you. When could I start? Fall semester, if you're ready. We'd need to meet with you to assess where you are academically, but your father has been keeping us updated on your situation. We understand that you've been dealing with family responsibilities." Family responsibilities. That was a much nicer way of saying I'd been wiping my father's ass for 3 years. "I'd like to schedule a meeting," I said, "as soon as possible. How about next week? We're specifically interested in students who've taken time off for caregiving responsibilities. There are actually programs and scholarships available for people in your exact situation." Of course there were. Dad had probably researched every available option. After I hung up, I went to find Mom. She was in the garden, pulling weeds from the flower bed she'd been neglecting for the past few months. "I called the university," I said. "I can go back in the fall." She looked up at me, dirt on her hands, tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you." "I'm scared," I admitted. "I'm 25 years old, and I feel like I'm starting over." "You are starting over. That's okay. Starting over takes courage. What if I can't do it? What if I've been away too long? Then you'll figure it out. You spent 3 years learning how to take care of someone with dementia. You can handle engineering school." She was right. I'd learned things in the past 3 years that weren't taught in any classroom. I'd learned patience, resilience, how to solve problems under pressure. I'd learned how to advocate for someone who couldn't advocate for themselves, how to navigate complex medical and insurance systems, how to find hope in hopeless situations. Maybe those weren't wasted years after all. Maybe they were preparation for a different kind of life than I'd originally planned, but a meaningful life nonetheless. That evening, I sat down and wrote a letter to Dad. I knew he'd never read it, but I needed to say the words anyway. "Dad," I wrote, "I found your plan. All of it. The accounts, the emails, the real reason for the will. I understand now what you were trying to do, and I want you to know that it worked. I'm going back to school. I'm going to build the life you wanted me to have. I'm going to choose myself for once, instead of choosing everyone else first. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. You loved me enough to save me from myself, even if it meant I might hate you for it. That's the kind of love I hope to have someday. The kind of love I hope to give to my own children. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't see. Thank you for planning my escape. Thank you for believing in my future, even when I'd given up on it. I love you, Dad, and I promise I won't waste the gift you gave me." I sealed the letter and put it in the box with his other personal things. Someday, maybe I'd share it with my own children, as a reminder of the grandfather who'd loved their mother enough to orchestrate her freedom. But first, I had to earn that freedom. I had to rebuild my life, piece by piece, choice by choice. And for the first time in 3 years, I was excited about the future. 6 months later, I was sitting in a thermodynamics class, taking notes on entropy and heat transfer, when I realized I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not just in that classroom, but in my life. The transition back to school hadn't been easy. I'd forgotten how to study, how to manage my time, how to interact with people my own age. My classmates were mostly 21, 22 years old, and I felt ancient at 25. They complained about professors and assignments, and I wanted to tell them about changing adult diapers and watching someone you love forget your name. But I didn't. I learned to keep my experiences to myself, to focus on the present instead of dwelling on the past. I learned to be a student again. The money Dad had saved for me made all the difference. I didn't have to work while going to school, didn't have to stress about tuition or living expenses. I could focus entirely on my studies, on rebuilding the academic skills I'd lost during my 3 years away. I'd moved into a small apartment near campus, close enough to visit Mom regularly, but far enough away to maintain my independence. She was doing well, better than any of us had expected. She'd joined a grief support group, started volunteering at the hospital, even begun dating a widower from her church. Dad would be so happy to see you thriving, I told her during one of our weekly dinners. He'd be happy to see you thriving too, she replied. You look like yourself again. She was right. I felt like myself again, or maybe like a new version of myself. The girl who dropped out of college 3 years ago had been naive, sheltered, unsure of her own strength. The woman who'd returned was different, older, more confident, more aware of what really mattered. I'd made new friends, study partners, who didn't know about my past unless I chose to share it. I'd even started dating again, cautiously, awkwardly at first, but with growing confidence. Jake and I talked regularly now, real conversations about our lives, our hopes, our relationship with Dad's memory. He'd kept his promise about the inheritance, transferring everything to Mom and me according to what he believed Dad would have wanted. But more than that, he'd kept his promise to be a better brother. He visited more often, called more frequently, and most importantly, he'd started building a relationship with Mom that didn't revolve around crisis management. They'd become friends, not just mother and son, and I knew Dad would have loved that. One evening, while I was studying for my advanced calculus exam, I got a call from an unknown number. Is this Catherine Mitchell? The voice was professional, female. Yes. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm with the university's Engineering Honor Society. I'm calling because we'd like to offer you a position as a peer mentor for other students who've taken extended breaks from their education. I set down my pencil. I'm sorry, what? We have a program for students who've returned to school after taking time off for family caregiving responsibilities. It's a growing demographic, and we found that peer support is crucial for success. Your professors have recommended you as someone who might be interested in helping other students navigate the transition back to academic life. My professors recommended me? They're very impressed with your academic performance, but more than that, they're impressed with your maturity and your ability to balance academic demands with life experience. We think you'd be an excellent mentor. I thought about the girl who'd dropped out of college 3 years ago, who'd been so afraid of failure that she'd never taken any real risks. That girl would have been terrified of this opportunity, but I wasn't that girl anymore. I'd be interested, I said. Tell me more. The program was exactly what I wished I'd had when I'd returned to school, a support system for students who were starting over, who were older than their classmates, who were carrying the weight of significant life experiences. Students who'd taken time off to care for sick family members, or who'd served in the military, or who'd raised children before pursuing their education. We meet twice a month, Dr. Chen explained. Small groups, very informal. You'd share your own experience, offer practical advice, and mainly just listen. Sometimes students need to know they're not alone in feeling out of place. I can do that. Excellent. We'll send you the program materials and schedule. And Catherine, thank you. These programs make a real difference in retention rates for non-traditional students. Non-traditional students. That's what I was now. Someone who'd taken the long way around, who'd learned that there's more than one path to your destination. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment, looking at the photos on my desk. Dad at my high school graduation, proud and beaming. Mom and Dad at their anniversary dinner, just a few months before his diagnosis. Jake and me as kids, building a snowman in the backyard of the house that was now truly Mom's home. I thought about the letter Dad had written me, the one where he'd told me not to let taking care of him become my whole life. He'd been right, but not in the way I'd originally understood. Taking care of him hadn't become my whole life. It had become the foundation for a different kind of life, one built on compassion, resilience, and the understanding that love sometimes means letting go. I pulled out my phone and called Jake. "Hey," he said, "how's studying going?" "Good, really good. I got offered a position as a peer mentor for other students who've taken time off for caregiving. That's amazing. Are you going to do it? Yeah, I think I am. I think Dad would like that, me helping other people who've been through what I've been through. He would love that. He'd be so proud of you. I know. I can feel it, you know? I can feel his pride. Not because I'm doing what he wanted me to do, but because I'm doing what I want to do. That's the difference, isn't it, between sacrifice and choice? Yeah, I think that's what he was trying to teach me, that taking care of people is beautiful, but only if you're also taking care of yourself. That love isn't about giving up everything for someone else. It's about building a life that has room for both service and self-fulfillment. You sound happy. I am happy. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy. After we hung up, I went back to my calculus homework, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the students I'd meet through the mentoring program, the ones who'd put their lives on hold to care for someone else, who were now trying to find their way back to their own dreams. I thought about what I'd tell them, what I'd learned from my own experience, that it's okay to grieve the life you thought you'd have while building the life you actually have, that sacrifice isn't meaningless just because it's temporary, that love takes many forms, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone else's crisis become your entire identity. I'd tell them about my father, who'd loved me enough to orchestrate my freedom, who'd understood that the greatest gift he could give me wasn't money or property, but the courage to choose my own life. And I'd tell them that it's never too late to start over, to rebuild, to become the person you were meant to be, that sometimes the long way around is the only way to get where you need to go. I finished my homework and went to bed, excited about the future in a way I hadn't been since I was 22 years old. I had plans again, goals, dreams that belonged to me and no one else. But I also had gratitude for the experience that had taught me what really mattered, for the father who'd loved me enough to save me from myself, and for the family that had learned to love each other in new ways. Dad had been right about one thing. I was too good for my own good, but he'd also been right about something else, that with the right support, the right push, the right kind of love, I could learn to be good to myself too. And that, I realized, was the most profound lesson of all.